Great, thanks, Wally. I'm Rebecca. We're going to start with some brief introductions from myself and our mentors, and then I'm going to lead a loose, informal conversation where I ask them some questions that I think you all might enjoy hearing the answers to. But since I can't read your minds, I encourage you to ask your own questions. We're here to serve you. So your questions are our priority over the ones that we have written down on our papers. So please don't hesitate to either unmute yourself, raise your hand, unmute yourself, and say what you really want us to tackle or insert a question into the chat. But to get us started, as I said, I'm Rebecca Bauer, class of 2014. I live in Washington, D.C. Right now, I work at National PTA, that's the Parent Teacher Association. Your high school or middle school or elementary school growing up might have had a PTA. This is just the national headquarters that oversees all of that good stuff. I am a family engagement specialist there, which means I work closely with parents and parent leaders to help them support their children and the children in their schools. And I do that in a variety of ways, from managing grants that go out to the field to producing resources, as well as producing a podcast, which is one of my favorite parts of the job. I get to do a lot of everything in my role, which I really appreciate. When I was at Vassar, I was a psych major and I got certified in childhood education. Always thought I wanted to teach, but then ended up going the nonprofit route, which I can speak to more later. I also went back to grad school in 2016 and got my master's in education policy from Penn. So next up, Julia, can you introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Schmidt. I graduated in 2017 and I was a psychology major at Vassar. I did not know until I left college that I was interested in education. And really my first job and then my experience afterward is what has brought me to education and kept me there. I currently work as an education and social policy researcher at a nonprofit called MDRC. And my work focuses on, our organization studies programs and policies that improve outcomes for low-income students and communities. And my work specifically focuses on, I'm on a number of projects that look at financial aid, as well as different kinds of programs and policies that help students stay enrolled and on track to graduating. Before I worked at MDRC, I worked in a school, an elementary charter school in New York City. And my job there was to analyze student data to try to help teachers figure out which students needed more support in the classroom. And then I also managed special education. So two very different experiences in education, but both really rewarding. I will call on Angelica.
Hi, everyone. Angelica, class of 2013. I graduated from Vassar with a bachelor's in Latin American and Latino studies. While I was there, I actually thought I was either going to do political science and go to law school or do econ and do something finance related. Neither of those options really liked me, is what I like to say. But I really loved Latin American and Latino studies, and senior year came around and I was like, well, I need to graduate, so I might as well just like stick this out. When I graduated from Vassar, I went into union organizing. So I was very involved with Mecha de Vassar. While I was there, we were some of the folks that kept going the May Day rallies. We would close down Main Street in Poughkeepsie. And so I knew I wanted to be very, on the ground activism and like make a career out of it. It's not sustainable once you leave college and you have like responsibilities and family and a lot of things. I would organize with the meat packers out in LA and sometimes be out 2, 3 a.m. trying to get signatures. Again, not sustainable or not the lifestyle that I wanted. Then I was an immigration paralegal. And if you know anything about immigration law, it's just a lot of paperwork. Our immigration policies are really broken. A lot of the times I was working on cases where we were just delaying deportations, which is, you file a motion just so that your client gets on. The backlog is so intense that like just putting in the paperwork gives them another 2, 3 years to stay in this country. And then you keep doing that until immigration law changes. I was not willing to wait that long. I ended up going back to Vassar. I'm a first generation professional. And so Vassar was really empowering for me as a first gen Latina. I know that it doesn't feel that way when like you're there and you're like what is this, all this privilege? I don't feel like I belong. But I had a lot of my first great mentors at Vassar. So I wanted to go back and be like, hey, my mom can't help me figure out my life because, my mom was undocumented and she's a hotel housekeeper. So I was like, let me ask my professors what to do. And I didn't do this while I was a student. So I needed to go back. And when I went back, I got a lot of great advice. Ended up going to UCLA for grad school. I got my master's of education, just specifically in student affairs, still working with undocumented students. But moved around. So I've worked at UCLA, USC, and now I'm at UW Seattle. So I'm one of the folks on the West Coast on this call. But yeah, Kyle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle DeAngelis, class of 2015. I currently teach fourth grade at a New York City public school. I graduated from Vassar with a major in psychology, and I got my teaching certification at Vassar through the Dean's Program, which means that I did my student teaching this semester after I graduated. Before I got into teaching, I did an internship at the American Federation of Teachers in Washington, working on a couple of different projects relating to education policy. My first teaching job was at a preschool here in New York City. I taught pre-K for 2 years and I loved it, but I also knew that in the longer term, I wanted to be teaching in the elementary grades. So after that, I taught for 2 years at a public school in the Bronx, teaching fourth grade math, before segueing this year into my current position, where I teach all subjects. And I will pass it over to Joe for the last introduction.
Thanks, Kyle. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Russell, graduated from Vassar in class of 2003, which means that I started at Vassar in 1999. Feels like a long time ago. At Vassar, I studied what was then called biopsychology. You all now know it as neuroscience and behavior, but previously, literally, it was just like a double major of psych and bio stuck together. And again, if I were a sophomore at Vassar, I would not have been in the education cluster. Certainly, as a student, I wasn't thinking about education at all. I am currently the Assistant Dean of Students at the University of Vermont. So I work in higher ed student affairs and have for my whole career. Right after Vassar decided to take a break by becoming, it's similar to what the house advisor position at Vassar is. So working in residential life at a school, and then very quickly realized that it was going to be my career and I was going to stick around and do it. Back then, I'll actually name, the goal was, I want to be the Dean of Students back at Vassar. Was still possible, still might happen. But back then it was like, oh yeah, I could be, his name was DB Brown when I was at Vassar. I was like, I could be DB Brown. Again, I think the common theme in my field is no one knew that it was a career. No one knew that it was something you could do as a career. Most people kind of just stumbled into it and then kind of stuck around. We did this in the previous group, and I think it would be helpful for us to have a sense for the participants, sophomores in the room. Is your interest higher ed? Is your interest K through 12? Is your interest not classroom teaching or teaching, but some other aspect of education? So we welcome you all to maybe put that in the chat if you can, just to give us a sense of how we can like frame our responses in a way that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe. And thanks everyone for sharing. So we encourage you to do that, just so we have a sense of who's in the room. And we know you might have a variety of interests. You might have no idea, but any information you're willing to share is helpful for us, as we're here to give you whatever is most relevant to your interests today. To start us off, I want to talk a little bit broadly about the why. And I know some of us did this a little bit in our introductions, but I want to open it up to what really drew you to the field of education. What are some of your favorite parts of working in this field? And then what are some of the challenges?
I'll start, and then I'm going to go to Angelica after me. Quickly, I think maybe that I'm going to reframe a little bit as what has kept me in the field, because as I said, I wasn't drawn to it. I didn't think of it as a
Yeah.
career that I would do for any length of time. As I came to the end of my biopsych major, I was a little bit academically burnt out. I knew I didn't want to do research in a lab, looking down microscopes anymore, and I was going to take a break. And the break was I would enter the field of student affairs, work in res life for a little bit, and then go back to grad school. What has kept me in the field, I think, has been how relational my work is. And it is kind of like it is not necessarily obvious or explicit, all of the work that goes into the student experience that you are having at Vassar, right? So all of the things that you just kind of take for granted as, oh, this is Vassar. So classes for sure, but then everything else outside of classes, the rich kind of programmatic activity, internship, career, clubs and organizations, all of those things don't just kind of magically happen. They happen because people this is their job. This is what they want to do. And so for me, very quickly, I was like, oh yeah, that actually is absolutely what I want to do. And could see myself again sticking around in the field. I didn't, in my introduction, explain what I do in my job. And the thing I spend most of my time doing is supporting students who are going through a very difficult experience, some kind of crisis or difficulty. And so how I will often say that to students is my job is to get to know students, and in getting to know students, know how to rally or wrap supports around the student to help them be successful. And so again, for me, that's like remarkably enriching and invigorating, is building relationships. I'm like highly extroverted, if you couldn't tell. Mentors might have, the other mentors would have told by now. And so we'll get to like how COVID has impacted that, and like Zoom life and distancing from people and not being physically on campus has impacted that. But certainly for me, it has kept me in the job. We'll also get to some of the big challenges I think that happen in higher ed, but some of those you're living it as undergrad students. So it's like getting into college, so admissions, it's how do you pay for college, it's social justice and equity in the university system, it's mental health as a college student, health in general, but mental health for sure. It's all of those things that you all are kind of living now are the challenges, of course, that then I interact with. So I'll stop there and move on to Angelica. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but.
No, it's okay. Thanks. I also realized I didn't share what I do now. So I work for the largest standalone cultural center in the United States, which is basically if the Alana Center had its own building on campus, was 3 stories, had club rooms, office room for all the student orgs, but only for students of color or students who are first gen low income, or EOP students. So I'm very, very like blessed to be in this position, because we know that there's not a lot of resources in higher ed for marginalized students or standalone places, right? Usually they're tacked on to something else. And so we really get to design what we want our programming to look like, everything we do. Like, we're not funded by the state, which comes with its pros and its cons when you're thinking about COVID. One thing I did want to also highlight, because I do see a lot of folks talking about counseling at the high school level, that's my dream job. And I had a Vassar mentor and a couple of Vassar mentors, both professors and alums, 5 years ago tell me, you want to be this college counselor, guidance counselor in high school, but everything you do, because I was choosing between working at the high school my partner was working at, I had a job offer, and I was like, this is the job. This is the job that I want. I want to work next to my college counselor and like just do this. But I also had a job offer in undergraduate admissions at USC. And I was like, oh, well, but this is different. I don't know if this is what I want to do. And I had a couple of mentors tell me, taking that, like that counseling job is always going to be there, but being an undergraduate admissions officer is gonna give you skills to better help those students, right? And so my career trajectory, because I've jumped around in serving, so I've worked in undergraduate admissions, graduate admissions, student conduct in residential life. Now I'm working in multicultural education. Like all of this is preparing me for when I do go back and work with high school students. Personally, for me, the reason why I got into this job is I know higher ed can be disempowering, but it can also be empowering. And I felt like I didn't have models at Vassar. As much as I love the people who were there, you know, I think us as millennials were moving things really faster, and Gen Z a lot more faster, right? Like I think some of my students, when they're teaching me things, and I'm open to that, I'm open to being like, I don't know more than you. You are teaching me a lot. I think about how, you know, I didn't have great examples of self-care. So one thing I mentioned in the previous group was that I also have training in intergroup dialogue, and I'm a trauma-informed yoga instructor. When I was going through my graduate program, I knew that like, not only do I want to talk to my students about self-care, but I want to model it. I want to model boundaries. I want to model authenticity. Because when I was in undergrad, I had people telling me these things are important, but they weren't showing me how to do it. They weren't giving me these hard skills of like saying no. It is hard and it is scary, but this is how you do it politely, right? As a first gen student, there was so much like that I had to navigate. But yeah, so that's, I think, briefly kind of like tying in a little bit of what you're thinking, and why I went into student affairs, higher ed, is I do think that it is a space where we get to become our whole selves, right? I talk to my students about identity development. Oh my God, I think, Julie, I'm really jealous about like the research aspect of your job, because sometimes I wish I could take a pause and just read and like digest all this literature and think about best practices. But my day-to-day is so reactive that I'm just like, okay, I know there's like best practices out there, but I just need to do something now. Like this student's in crisis now, or this student needs this type of service. But yeah, just a little bit. So I'll popcorn it to Julia.
Sure. So, I, like I said earlier, I did not know that I was interested in education at Vassar. I studied psych. I did research as a senior, an independent research project. Loved doing research, loved psych, wanted to find a practical application of psychology in the world that wasn't becoming a professor, wasn't becoming a clinician. And, you know, I sort of fell into my first job. I was interested in this idea of using data and research to make people's lives better. And I started working at a school because they were interviewing on campus, and I was like, I need to practice my interview skills. Let me just sign up for an interview slot. I'll check their website, see what kinds of jobs they have. And I saw a job that was using data to help students. I really came to it from that end. And working in the school, I realized that if I want to help people, there's, you know, this is one of the best ways to do it. If I want to use data and research to help people, helping students, that's the way I want to do it. And I've been able to keep doing that in my current job, you know, shifting now to higher education. Even though I don't think I mentioned this in the last session, but my organization also studies K-12. It's just not the job that I was placed into when I arrived. But you know, using those research skills I built at Vassar that I'm so interested in, but turning it to a topic that I'm really passionate about. I think what's kept me in the field of education, like I said, realizing that it's a place where you can really impact people's lives by giving them better educational opportunities. I've also been really inspired by the work of the teachers that I worked with in the school, and by the students that I worked with, and how much potential I saw in all of them, and seeing how if students, I really believe that every kid has the potential to be successful, and that if they're given the right supports in school, then they can fulfill that potential. And a lot of times, those individualized supports are really hard to find for kids. So you know, but I think it's really important. So that's part of why I stuck around. I'll whoever else wants to answer.
Kyle, you want to chime in before we move on a little to more towards pathways, or you can answer both?
Well, I think I'll pick up with the pathways question, Rebecca, because I think one of the things that has been most surprising for me since graduation and since I started my teaching career is that I didn't expect to be switching schools so frequently in those first couple of years of my teaching career. If you read my bio or if you heard like what I said during my introduction, I taught at one school for 2 years, taught at another school for 2 years, and now I find myself in my current position. And in terms of thinking about like how I ended up in my current school and my current role, I think that one piece of advice that I have for anybody who's interested in K-12 education, and we also talked in the last session about how this advice can kind of translate to all industries, all roles in education, any interaction you as an individual have with an institution, like in terms of in terms of a job. It's just like looking for that alignment between your values as a teacher, your philosophy as a teacher, and like the values and philosophy that the institution or the school has. So one of the things that I found very challenging about my last job was that increasingly it just felt like the kind of teaching that I wanted to do in my classroom, the kind of classroom that I wanted to run, the kind of teacher that I wanted to be, didn't align with the expectations that the institution had. And as a teacher, sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where you can kind of close your classroom door and you can like block out all of what's going on, outside your own classroom and sort of like run things the way you want them to be. And then in other schools, the leadership is much more sort of like top down and like expect you to do certain things a certain way because they're striving for consistency. And consistency is not always a bad thing. It helps for students to know what to expect when they go from first grade to second grade and third grade and onwards. But I think that when consistency comes at the expense of like pursuing your own sort of like educational values or pursuing your own sort of like educational approach, I think that you will occasionally find yourself in a position where it's not necessarily that you want to leave teaching because teaching's not right for you, but it's that teaching in a specific school is not the right fit. So I am happier than I've ever been in any teaching position in the school that I'm currently at right now. And I would not have gotten to that place if I hadn't been, very specific about what I was looking for and not really afraid to sort of like go someplace else to find it. I think that especially in teaching, there's so much pressure to like, just sort of like buckle down and, you expect the first few years to be like really hard. And so you think that it's just supposed to be this sort of like masochistic experience. And, to some degree, the first years of teaching are always going to be a challenge. But I think that as early career teachers, you also have to like expect more for yourself, not just from yourself, right? Like you should expect that where you're teaching, there should be some degree of alignment between, the sorts of practices and philosophies that you developed at Vassar. Like you should expect to be able to sort of like live those philosophies and practices out in your teaching. So, if you are, and I saw in the chat, we have a lot of people who are interested in K-12 teaching in this session, more than we actually had the last session, which is exciting for me. But I think that you can't be afraid to, if a place isn't working for you, to like leave and go try it someplace else, because there is so much diversity in the field. There's so many different approaches that schools will take and different like stances they'll take on certain issues or certain practices. And you may find that, teaching at one school does not work for you, but that teaching in a completely other setting is immensely more rewarding. So yeah, in terms of thinking about the linearity or non-linearity of my path, I think that it's been sort of like striving for that sort of fit between like what the kind of teaching that I want to do and the kind of teaching that my school will support.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, I wanted to speak a little bit to linearity in terms of career paths as well, because I, at this point, can find my nonlinear path amusing. I think it was pretty stressful when I was in the thick of it, but I had always thought I wanted to be a K-12 teacher, particularly elementary school. I chose Vassar for its program. I got certified. I did my student teaching. And right around senior year, I really started to question if it was the right fit for me. And that was hard because I still believe that teaching is the most important job there is. And I had to grapple with the fact that I could believe that and still not necessarily believe that it would be the most fulfilling career for me. So when I like reached that moment, I was like also trying to simultaneously job search, and all of the experience I had was in teaching because I'd put all of my eggs in one basket despite everyone telling me not to. But in the end, what I ended up doing was I had a part-time job teaching as an assistant teacher at a preschool at a JCC in Rockville, Maryland, and I had this part-time job at a small education nonprofit. Supporting the executive director and doing communications work. And I literally would spend half my day in Maryland and then take the metro downtown and spend half my day in the office. And it was just sort of nuts and wearing. And it was very clear to me where my heart was. And I knew that I wasn't going to be doing kids a service by sticking around and working in an environment that wasn't the best fit for me. Because I think one of the big differences was just I was really looking for something that was more different every day. One of the things I like about my job is that I do different things every day. And then I like to think about like the systems and how they all fit together and strategize about that in a way that's very different than coaching students around similar lessons. So that was something I concluded. And so when an opportunity arose, I was able to make my part-time nonprofit job into my full-time job. And I never look back, and I'm not at that nonprofit anymore. That was 2 jobs ago, but I've stuck in the same general vicinity of organizations that either support teachers or support families, so that I can still be close to the work that I'm passionate about, but in a different way. So I think sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to get there, but certainly was not linear for me. Does anyone else want to talk a little bit about not just how you got to your job, but sort of the skills? Oh, Joe, do you want to?
Could I interrupt you, Rebecca?
Yeah.
Maybe I know that you're the one asking the questions, but
Go for it.
curious on behalf of our sophomores. And I think I heard an answer, but I wasn't sure. Kind of when for you, so there a lot of things like you came in, you did school, you did student teaching, you started to get a job. Were there any indicators prior to when you decided like, maybe I don't want to do classroom teaching, that it was not the right thing for you, but you kind of just kept with it? Or were there not indicators? You were like, no, this is great, until it wasn't great? What was that experience like as you navigated it through Vassar and then after Vassar?
That's a good question. I think that there were some signs, but part of the issue was when I was doing field work, I really enjoyed doing field work when it was 2 to 3 days a week. And then I could go to classes and write papers, because if what you think about, if what I said is like, I need different things to thrive, I was still thriving. I'm like, oh, I love getting to go spend 3 hours a day in the second grade classroom. And all throughout high school, I had a job working with kids after school too. I think it was my student teaching experience. And again, it was sort of what Kyle was saying, was like, I wasn't sure if it was hard because it was supposed to be hard, or if it was hard because it wasn't the right fit for me. But I do think what was starting to emerge for me was that even when I was doing the stuff that was supposed to be enjoyable and fun working with the kids, I would enjoy it the first time I did it. But then, when I was teaching the, same math concept for the 5th time, I don't know if it's a lack of patience or if it's just a different kind of patience, but it wasn't doing it for me. So I know that's a little bit of a roundabout answer, but hopefully it got at a little bit of what you were trying to get at. It is a good time also to open it up. If anybody else has questions, we're happy to take them now. This is pretty informal, so.
Yeah, I guess I recently have been starting to think about grad school because I know that's needed for the New York teaching certification. So I'm looking at that. And I'm also first gen low income, so I knew almost nothing about undergrad. And so I know absolutely nothing about grad. And I guess what I didn't realize was when I was researching programs that it's not like general majors anymore. It's not like I'm an English major now, so I can go into a bunch of different things. But in terms of like, I was just like, oh, I'm going to major in education for my master's degree. And then I realized that an education master's isn't just an education and master's. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, how did you guys kind of research that and find out what programs fit for you? And also, how limiting are those programs? Because like Rebecca said, I don't want to put like all my eggs in one basket, but I'm not really sure how to not do that. And so, yeah, so I guess just those questions.
Iris, is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it because Angelika's not the only one who forgot something important from her introduction. Because, and I forgot this in the last session too, which shows you where my head is at right now. But I am currently a master's student as well. I'm in the program in curriculum and teaching at Teachers College, and I think that you had a lot of really great concerns that you just sort of laid out. I'm going to try to tackle as many of them as I can. But the first thing I wanted to say as it relates to certification is that you just have to sort of like pay attention to, you know, what certification is that you're looking for specifically and whether or not any given program will eventually lead to that certification, because it is 1,000 times easier to get a teaching certification, particularly in New York State, but I think really this applies to any state, but it's so much easier to do it when you have like the institution that's already sort of like laid out the requirements for you. They tell you need to take these classes and or classes in these sort of like fields. And then that will lead to you at the very end of it graduating with not just a degree, but also a teaching certification. So you definitely want to make sure you're finding a program that if you're looking for your initial teaching certification, it'll lead to that. And then if you're like me, if you got your initial certification when you were at Vassar, you'll eventually look for a program that helpfully leads, it's helpful if it leads to a professional certification, which that becomes like, that's your permanent teacher certification that lasts the duration of your career. And in terms of just like not wanting to be in a grad program where you focus on just one thing, I think it's helpful to look at like, if you're looking at a specific grad program, you can look at like, well, what are the requirements to get this degree? Because certain grad programs will tell you these are the like dozen classes that you need to take. You'll take these classes and then you'll end up with a master's degree in like a year or two. And if you're looking for a little bit more agency, there are other programs like the one that I'm in, where they say, okay, so you need like one class that relates to mathematics education, one that relates to science, one social studies, yada, yada, yada. But you can choose from a menu of different classes that fulfill that requirement. So kind of similar to the way that like in certain departments at Vassar, you know, they say like if you're a psych major like me, you know, you need a research methods course, but you can kind of decide like, do you want that to be developmental psychology? Do you want that to be physiological psychology? So, you know, there's like there's different degrees of flexibility depending on the program. But most programs, you know, it's very easy to sort of like look online and to see whether it's, you know, how narrow the path is that they're going to let you take, you know, in pursuit of that degree. And then the other thing that you can't be afraid of is just like contacting people in those programs, you know, whether they have like admissions officers or whether they've got professors who like specifically says they're the point person for like this degree path. You know, if you send them an email and you say that you're a prospective student, you know, most of the time, you know, they're used to getting contacted by prospective students and they'll, you know, get back to you. I think sometimes there's this stigma where you feel, I definitely felt like this when I was looking at grad programs, but it was like, oh, I'm not a student there, so I can't like send them an email. Like they've got their own students and those are the only people they're going to respond to. You know, I don't think that that's always the case. I think that very frequently, you know, it's not unusual for a prospective student to contact someone at, you know, a graduate institution like that and to say like, you know, I'm interested in your program. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? So yeah, it's when you do your research, I think that you find that a lot of the information you're looking for is available online. And if it's not, there's usually people you can get in contact with to learn more.
And as a sophomore, you don't need to have a plan for grad school just yet.
Yeah, I can also share, I think, another thing is to consider your current professors. So for me, what was really helpful was that when I returned to work at Vassar, I was, figuring out, okay, Professor Alamo is telling me to go to grad school. And I know I want to be in California or at least on the West Coast. So he got his PhD at UC Santa Barbara, but he was in a cohort with other students, right? So his friends were the people he was now connecting me with and being like, hey, I know like my friend is teaching at Cal State LA, this other friend is teaching here. So if you're kind of feeling like, I don't know if I should reach out to this person directly or this professor, this faculty member, letting your current professors at Vassar know, they'll be able to connect you because sometimes they're friends with people in the field, right? The second thing is funding, right? I think for me, I was very like money conscious. So my program was a 1 year and it's higher ed. So there's no certification, but like in California, I can choose to do like a certificate program to get the PPS credential if I want to do it at a public high school. There's a lot of ways to kind of figure out, do I want to counsel in a high school or do I in a public high school, in a private high school, in a charter school, all these different levels. But I knew I didn't want to pay for it. So I looked at two things. One, I looked at schools with graduate assistantships. So I know like UW Seattle has a really great graduate assistantship. We have a graduate student that works for us. They get full tuition, they're unionized, and they get a part-time job that pays really, really well. So, that's really nice as if you're going to school for 2 years. Again, I chose a 1-year program because I already had some work experience. And so I was like, I just need to get this degree. I need to get the network. So I knew that I wanted to work in LA. I wanted to be back home. And so going to UCLA, which is a well-known school in Los Angeles, it was between USC and UCLA. I was like, I need to be here so that it can connect me to, the local colleges and universities in the area. Again, you don't need to have a plan now, but those things do exist, right? Like I think students are like, oh, a graduate degree is expensive. Yeah, it can be expensive. But my program offered me an assistantship and it also gave me full tuition. And so it was something that, even when I had faculty members at Vassar telling me like, no, you don't have to pay for school. As a first-gen low-income student, I was like, well, I don't believe you. And then I got my award letter and I was like, what? Like, okay, I guess it is true. So I try to share that as much as possible.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we're gonna have time for more questions in a little bit, so keep thinking of what you want to ask us. But I do want to talk a little bit about COVID-19, which has completely changed the working world in so many ways. I know some of our jobs more than others. Just to sort of kick it off, for my job, I work in an office, so the actual way I do my work hasn't shifted that much. It was a fun challenge trying to figure out how to record a podcast remotely because we used to go to the studio. So that was probably the biggest stressor for me. But besides that, it's pretty similar. We just try to create content now that is much more related to the current realities that parents are facing. What I do think is really fascinating about all of this is sort of what we're hearing may stick around in the working world even after COVID is gone. I know that personally, my boss has told me that she really doesn't care if I come back into the office full time, even once all this is over. It might be that I work remotely 3 days a week. So I do think we're going to see some big shifts, and I wanted to open up to the group to just share how has COVID impacted your day to day, and what are your thoughts on how it's going to have a lasting impact on education or not. Joe, you want to kick us off?
Me? Sure. I mean, sure.
Thanks.
Again, I think most people want to hear from Kyle because he's the one doing classroom teaching. But anyhow, so again, at the University of Vermont, like you all are experiencing, the whole world has changed, right? The whole modality, the whole what we think of as college is kind of shifting. Not a lot of in-person activities, not, can't be in the classroom sitting with each other in the same way. It's been challenging. Again, I'll name selfishly, as a highly extroverted person, I've missed the energy and the connection with the student population. Like that's, again, half of why I do my job. It is to be in that environment. So that has been hard. I do think there are going to be some things that we take with us. I agree with you, Rebecca, that it's like we're starting to learn a whole bunch of lessons around why is it that we've done it that way, only because we've only ever done it that way. Like, is there now going to be an opportunity to kind of have new modalities of learning, new opportunities, new ways of doing things that before no one ever thought about? So I'm sure that that will happen. I'm going to make a broad statement around, I think the thing that we are all learning, and my hope is that you all at Vassar are learning it as well, is all of the like the subtext to the text. It's all of the things that like how the decisions were made to do school like you're doing school, right? Like you are in an environment in which you have some like brilliant people thinking and acting and making decisions on your behalf. And my hope is that you all are learning and like through osmosis or directly kind of figuring some of those pieces out, because you will leave Vassar. And my hope is that by the time you leave Vassar, things will be very different, but some of those things will be the same. And I will almost guarantee that any environment that you step into, the things that you have taken for granted that you think are just normal every day, like, of course, everybody is thinking like this, or everybody's making those decisions, or life is like that. You're going to step in and a policy won't exist, or a practice will be different. And you'll be able to be the one to say, oh, what about, here's a structure, or here's a model, or here's one way I've seen this happen, i.e. at my undergrad, this is what we did. You'll also learn the lesson of sometimes you need to be cautious about every sentence you start with can't start with, well, at Vassar, here's what we did. Well, at Vassar, my one professor used to, that will happen, not a bad thing, but you'll start to frame it as, well, here's a suggestion, or here's one way I've seen it happen in the past, or this was a really, really effective thing that allowed us to blah, blah, blah. So my hope is for you all is that you're learning those lessons. Be conscious of it, like look around you, ask the question, why is that policy? Why did they put that rule in place? Why can't we do this? Why should we do that? And you'll start to realize that your president, our president, who is a public health, like nationally known for public health, is actually like on the cutting edge of what a college campus should be doing in the middle of a pandemic. So I'll name out loud that I think for me, those are the big things that we're going to take away from COVID, are some of those big, like, we don't know what the next thing is going to be. There'll be a thing. We don't know what that's going to be. That will reframe how we have to do work, reframe how we have to learn. But we're starting to learn the lessons of how do we pivot? How do we be flexible? How do we not fix in our mindset, but how do we be agile in our mindset? So that wasn't really like the nitty gritty of how I do my work, which I think would bore everybody, but maybe a high level encouragement for you all to think about.
I'll jump in quickly, and then I do want to hear from Kyle, because I think that's going to be the most interesting. But so my experience has been similar to some of the experiences shared already. My day-to-day work has changed very little because I work in an office. But what I do think is interesting is that, my role, the goal of my organization is to look at contemporary issues in higher education, K-12 education. We have other policy areas as well. And those are changing during this time. And a lot of the practices that people might normally do are also changing, which, disrupts our work a little bit, sure. But what's been very interesting and inspiring to see is the way that my organization has said, okay, we have learned things about how to best serve students, how to best structure programs that are still going to be applicable to the new challenges that we're facing. So a big initiative that we've been putting forward is taking the things that we've learned in previous research, writing things up and trying to get that information into the hands of people at schools so that they can better be equipped to deal with what they're facing in the pandemic. So a great example is last spring when Congress passed the CARES Act, they put a ton of money towards higher education. Schools got a ton of money and they had to give about half of it to students in emergency financial aid. That was kind of new. Like it looked a little bit different from how it often does, but many schools have, emergency aid programs where they can give funding to students in times of emergency if they're having, a family crisis, whatever the case may be. So we know best practices about how you should allocate funds to students, how students should hear about the opportunity from the college. So we were able to write that up and share it out with colleges across the country to help them figure out how can we best get the funds that we've gotten from the government into the hands of the students who most need it. So it's been interesting to see how we're able to take, this research we've already done and fit it into a new situation and still be useful.
I'll
All
go
right,
for it.
so-
Everybody's waiting for your reply.
Yeah, and so already you're setting the expectations way too high here. I have to say now there's like this high expectations. Now I'm just going to disappoint everyone by not saying something profoundly interesting. So yeah, you hyped it up way too much. But in any case, I'll talk a little bit about what's going on now and where I see all of this going for classroom teaching. So obviously the nature of my work has changed dramatically in the last year. I'm in New York City and we're currently using a hybrid model for instruction, which means that some students are in school in person some days a week. Some students are at home other days and they switch off. And then there's a third group of students who are at home full time because that's what their families have opted for. And the greatest challenge that I'm encountering with this is that we, as the in-school teachers, myself included, we have to teach the kids who are in school and at home at the same time, which is not what the city last summer when we were in the process of like figuring out how reopening school buildings was going to look. The mayor, the school's chancellor, the school department, they said that the plan was for different teachers to be responsible for like a single group of students so that you'd only be teaching like in person or at home like at one time. And of course, the problem with that is that there just aren't enough teachers in the city to make that structure work. And so we've ended up with situations like at my school where the teachers who are in person are teaching in person and at home at the same time. And the teachers who are fully remote end up teaching multiple grades during the day, which is, it's a lot for any teacher. So no matter where you're working right now, in my school community, nobody's got an easy job, that's for sure. But I mean, the good news is that we are really hopeful that by the fall, we will be back in school full-time and in person. A lot has to go right for that to happen, which is kind of scary to think about, because trust me, 1 year of this is definitely like the right amount, if perhaps too much of it, I would say. So we're optimistic though that by the fall, there will be a degree of normality. But whether or not that happens, I think that for me, I think that the legacy of COVID and the school COVID-related closures that we've seen this last year, I think the legacy of it for school teaching is going to be helping students who have, fallen behind grade level benchmarks in terms of keeping them where they're supposed to be. And I think that this is a concern that we're hearing from a lot of places right now. And I think that obviously it stems from a genuine concern for students and for, students who there might be like long-term educational impacts to the schools that they've missed this year. There obviously is a concern that the students who are most affected by these shutdowns are students for whom the schooling system already does not serve tremendously well in the first place. Color, poor students. And I think that the concerns are genuine, but for me, I worry that we're going to respond to this in a way that's not constructive. I worry about students just being over tested over the next couple of years because there's this desire to know like exactly where they are and try to determine exactly what it is they need to catch up to these sort of like, you know, arbitrary grade level benchmarks. And I also don't think, and Joe raised this point in the last section, I wanted to ascribe credit where credit's due, and this is a really important point too, is I don't think that there has been enough attention given to you know, what students may have actually gained by living through these experiences. You know, there's always this sort of like deficit perspective that a lot of people bring to the work we do in teaching, where it's all about like learning loss or thinking about the things that students have fallen behind on and what are we going to do to catch them up. I think that it would be helpful to understand that, yes, like obviously students are going to need a lot more academic support, a lot more social emotional support, a lot more just generalized sort of like teacherly love and affection going forward than like ever before. But I don't think that there's been so much of an acknowledgement of the fact that like what students have like lived through is like, you know, profoundly transformative, you know, like, and you know, in terms of being able to like think flexibly, in terms of developing sort of like the ability to adapt to challenging situations and to sort of like exert, even from a very young age, some like independence in your education and in your lives. You know, I think that there are certain things that, you know, if we want to look for in this like terrible situation, we want to look for some of the some positives and some sort of like positive signs. I think that we can really sort of like celebrate the ways in which our students have you know, persevered through a really incredibly challenging situation. So I bring these things up because for those of you who are interested in K-12 teaching and who think that that's something you may want to pursue, you know, when you leave Vassar in just a couple of years, I mean, these are sort of like long-term considerations, because long at whether or not we're back in person full-time in the fall or whether that happens at a later date, you know, like the schools will reopen at some point. At some point, my desks won't be 6 feet apart again. They'll be like back together in their little groups. And, you know, we're going to see at some point some more, you know, a much higher degree of what we consider to be normality in the classroom. But I think that dealing with sort of like both the academic and the like social emotional fallout from this, I think is something that we as educators need to sort of be proactive about over the next several years, and to also just think about how we you know, approach this, you know, and ensuring that whatever our response is, it's constructive and it builds on student strength and it doesn't just sort of like you know, it doesn't put students under like inappropriate amounts of pressure just because like they are not meeting these arbitrary benchmarks.
Yeah. Kyle, I do have a logistical follow-up question just because we have so many K-12 people interested in K-12. I have a friend who used to teach preschool and is doing her first year teaching first grade, but she was doing the job search for that first grade position amidst the pandemic. And she was really worried about the type of skills she would need with technology to make herself marketable. And I'm wondering if I have a feeling that even once everyone's in person again, some of this educational technology is here to stay. Do you have any thoughts about what teacher cert students or education students should be doing to make themselves competitive in like knowing how some of these different tools work?
I think that it's hard to know like how much is going to stick around going forward, because like it's kind of funny, Rebecca, I think I know who you're talking about because it's somebody we know in common. But in any case, that's neither here nor there. But you know, in the case of like a first grade teacher, like I don't know going forward how much technology, you know, we think is going to be appropriate for like very young students. And I think that there's sort of like it's really sort of I think to be determined how much of that will stick around. I think that with older children, you know, I teach fourth grade, and you know, people who are in middle school and high school may see that there's more of an emphasis on sort of the, you know, those technological components that we didn't see before. But I mean, I think right now everybody just like so craves to be back in like the physical classroom with their
Mhm.
students. You know, it goes back to what people are raising about how important like the personal relationships are. And I know that you all as students experience this from the other end with your professors, you know, as good as you know, any instructor's remote setup is, you know, you're still missing something. That's sort of like that closeness that
Mhm.
comes from sharing like physical space with one another. And so that might be a very unsatisfying answer, Rebecca, because
No, I
the
appreciate
short,
that.
well, the
Yeah.
short answer is like, I really don't know. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
did say, I was kind of half joking in the last section about how in New York City, they're saying that snow days are now going to be a thing of the past, which I find immensely depressing. And I think we all kind of do. But then I also kind of raised the question of like, if that's really going to be the company line going forward, that's going to involve the city ensuring that every child in the public schools has a functional device and an internet connection every school year from now until like forever. And, you know, I'm not 100% convinced that the
Yeah.
city is ready to make that commitment. So I think the death of the snow day has been a bit exaggerated lately. But
Yeah.
in any
I hear you
case,
there. I've got one more question for the group, and then we're going to open it up for discussion and questions from all of you again. But as we all know, COVID-19 has been dominating our minds and the headlines, but unfortunately, it's not really the only crisis taking place right now. We've seen quite a few in 2020 and even so far this year. And one of the things we've noticed across industries, but I think particularly in education, is sort of a great awakening or a renewed interest or understanding that there needs to be more conversation around racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm curious sort of how like this has looked in your organizations over the past year or so, and what role you've played and sort of how you think this may or may not shape the field. Angelica, can I pick on you? I liked hearing some of your story last session.
Yeah, of course. I really like that technology question that you had asked because I was thinking about, the way I've used technology for both the Black Lives Matter movement, but also in response to COVID. And I think it just reminds me of how much each campus is different since I've worked in so many different universities. I think about the engagement that I have with my students now. Um, and to get a pulse of what they're doing, I've kind of, I run our Instagram account for our center. We have almost 3,000 students following us. And it's so funny because our leadership always wants to send out a climate survey to find out how students are doing. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. Just go on Instagram. Like we all tell our lives on Instagram. Like you can know if I'm having a good day or a bad day. And kind of like similar to Kyle that you said, like all this testing, I think we're relying so much on just sending out a survey, and we're not bringing up actions, right? So like we're saying like, we want to know how you're doing. And then it takes us 2 weeks and then we're kind of like, cool, our students are, dealing with anxiety, they're dealing with financial stress. And then it's kind of like, okay, we know that this is happening. So for me, I think like Instagram specifically, because that's the platform that I monitor more closely. That's where I kind of took the social justice, Black Lives Matter movement really to the forefront. So last year in the spring, when it was really active, working at a cultural center that similar to the Olana Center was born out of student protests, specifically the Black Student Union. It was really important for our identity, our alumni, our students, that we were doing something about it as a center, right? As an institution. What I loved is that our students we took a week and we decided, how are we going to talk about this? For me, social media is a way for our students to have a voice, right? So our students developed like Black and LGBTQ campaigns. They did, how to be an ally. Our students created letters to your faculty and professors about why these topics are important for both the humanities and the sciences. And I work, again, I work at UW Seattle, and so it's not interdisciplinary the way that Vassar is. I have engineering students who my job is to fill that gap of like, what is an identity? What is, what is intersectionality? What is critical race theory? And sometimes for me, I'm just like, that's what a liberal arts degree gave you. That's what the Vassar culture gave you, right? Whereas my students are like, oh, I know, like Black Lives Matter kind of force them to reckon with like, how much do I know and how am I being an ally? And I work in a cultural center, so I think one of the things I talked about last session was like confronting anti-Blackness in communities of color. I don't think people realized unintentionally how we were being anti-Black, and this forced us to reckon with, is Black History Month just an afterthought? Are we just doing things because we've always done it? Is MLK Jr. Day of Service just like what we do? Is it for, and as a cultural center, these are real questions, right? And so sometimes I think when our students are like, oh, our allies aren't doing enough, I also challenge them and say, well, are we doing enough as a cultural center, right? Because we don't really have, we can't really control other people's actions, but if we're not modeling that behavior, like don't expect from others what we're not expecting from ourselves. So it's a lot of reflection, a lot of deep thinking, and it's, again, being committed. So even, with Black History Month coming up, reminding my leadership at every staff meeting, have we thought where we're going? What is going to be our messaging? And luckily for me, I have a lot of autonomy. So sometimes, if our leadership, which is, COVID, I brought up financials earlier, like in higher ed, like we're losing a lot of money. Our money for our cultural center was made from student orgs being able to book our rooms. So you think about just rental fees, that's how we got our money. We've been closed down for a year. We've been able to get some funding, but we have to really think closely about, while my leadership is like, girl, we're thinking about money, I'm over here with like, okay, well, I'm on the ground with our students, and they don't see that, right? I think about now when I was a student and I was like, oh, I always thought admin wasn't doing enough. And then I'm like, oh, they have bigger problems to deal with. So that's but instead of, kind of like leaving students not knowing, I'm very like transparent. It's like, yeah, we're having money issues. We have to think about if we don't bring in money next year, we're going to have to cut our student staff. We don't want to cut our student staff because we employ about 30 students. Like we employ a lot of students for a cultural center. So yeah, coupling that with like, okay, well, our students still want to do something. What can they do? What is safe to do? That I think goes back to like social media, Instagram takeovers. And we're in a night teaching them how to navigate, okay, well, we're the institution. What are you gonna say on Instagram from our account? And is that gonna get us in trouble? What kind of trouble can we get in, right? That is like, where can we push the boundaries? So yeah, I don't know if that answers, but that's definitely, I think it's been interesting to work at a cultural center during this time. And that's just within our community. A lot of people in Seattle, right? Seattle's very white, it's very affluent. The tech scene is here. That doesn't even include everyone who was like, hey, we want to give you money, or we want to interact with your students. The ask that's coming from like externally from the community, that's a whole nother set of problems as well.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to chime in on this one?
Oh, I'm going to quickly repeat a theme. It's becoming a theme. Again, for you all, don't take for granted the things that you were exposed to at Vassar regarding things like Black Lives Matter. And I don't even know if I'm speaking concretely here, but I'm 99% sure that you had a college president probably make some pretty bold, clear statements about support for and a belief in Black Lives Matter, right? I work at a school in which that's not the case. I think now slowly, only because like the city of Burlington and national things have gotten on board, has the university leadership come out and stated certain things categorically. But early on, in the midst of student activism, a lot of the rhetoric was very, oh, well, of course we support it, but as a university, we can't take a stand because all lives matter, right? As a university, as a public university, where we can't be seen to be saying Black Lives Matter, which of course, like me and all my colleagues and all the students who are protesting are just like racking their brains for how are you not seeing this? And again, the systemic level of anti-Blackness and racism is just like appalling. So again, my encouragement to you all is to just kind of recognize what that means. And then as you do career stuff, as you think about what happens after Vassar, you're going to be bringing some of that with you, where you sometimes that is your voice that you can bring. Or again, you need to start to make some decisions about what does it mean to work at an institution that does or does not do that, right? What is your role as incoming staff? You might not have a lot of agency or authority. You might not be the CEO. You might not be the head of school, you might not be any number of things, but what role do you play to bring the level of awareness, activism, change, social change to your school? I will also, this is a bigger conversation of the flip that happens from, as an undergrad student at a college, you hold a lot of power. Literally, your voice is the most important voice amongst the stakeholder voices. Sometimes people don't act that way, but it is. And then all of a sudden you move into a profession, and often entry-level job, often lowest person on the org chart, that voice and that agency can sometimes feel a little bit differently. But again, I'm going to encourage you all to think about, as you have engaged in Black Lives Matter or other racial or social justice movements, then what does it mean for you to have those values aligned and reflected in the place you're going to work, and or what role do you have in then pushing the envelope wherever you end up working?
And I think something we talked a little bit about last session too is the how of pushing the envelope also. And which battles do you pick and why, and what kind of backup do you have? I think what's been an interesting experience for me has been, I don't think I realized fully when I started my job at PTA like 2 years ago, quite how far behind they were compared to, like, I guess my own mindset and the Vassar personality that persona, in terms of being able to say Black Lives Matter. And I think that, like, I'm very appreciative that my organization did get there and they issued a pretty strong statement. But I think now we're at the point of like, okay, you made the statement, but like, what are we going to do about those actions that back up that statement? And I think it's just an interesting balance. Like, it's an interesting balancing act to navigate once you're in the professional world, of knowing how to make that incremental change and having the patience to make that incremental change, and just like coming up with different strategies to do it, which, isn't the same as when you're able to like go full on protest and say, we want all of these 10 demands and we want them now. So I don't think this is necessarily an answer, but it's just a perspective to share that, depending on the type of climate you're working in, challenges will emerge in this area, and how you navigate them is just kind of up to you, and a constantly evolving, I think.
And I'll chime in quickly to echo some of that. And as the most recent graduate, one thing that you're going to find when you leave Vassar, no matter what you do, not only in your work life, but in your personal life, as you start interacting with people who did not have a liberal arts education, were not in the Vassar bubble, is that people's perspectives are going to be different, right? And you're in this really unique time in your life right now where you're surrounded by a lot of other people who think a lot about social justice, who think a lot about how can we be respectful of each other's identities, who are very well versed in how to be politically correct in a way that is inclusive of all different people. And that's not going to be the case in the real world. And obviously, someone mentioned in our last session, you have to sort of assume best intention when you're talking to people in a professional setting. You can't yell at people if they're not being respectful of different people's identities, but you can still help to educate people. And that approach, that how and that when is different. And it can be hard when you're at Vassar. You can just say to someone, hey, that's wrong. You said this, you should have said it this way, whatever. And you have to sort of walk a finer line as a professional. It doesn't mean that you can't walk the line. You still should if you feel supported and you feel like it's your place, then you absolutely should. But it can be sort of challenging to find yourself in a different situation where all of the beliefs that have been just sort of a given for 4 years are not the realities that the people are facing. So it's something to be aware of and just know.
And mentors, we're going to open it up for questions in like about 5 minutes, but I wanted to ask you if there's anything that you didn't get to share in this session that you want to, or any piece of advice. We're going to keep it quick, but if we want to go around, just going to give you like sort of some final thoughts, words, wisdom. Anybody want to kick us off with that?
I can. So I noticed a lot of you in the chat sort of, you're thinking about education, you're not really sure, you're still sort of charting your path. I think that's great. I've said a couple times now, I did not know that I wanted to be in education. I've landed here. It's been great. But one thing that we talked a little bit more about last session and this session is this idea of having a linear versus a nonlinear path. And I think a lot of times people at Vassar tend to not know exactly what they want to do when they leave Vassar, or it changes. And I think that there's so much value in that. I have family members, friends who have always known, like, okay, I want to be an archaeologist is my best friend's her passion. And for a long time I felt really uncomfortable thinking that I didn't know what the next step was always going to be. But what I've learned from having this winding path is that the kinds of things that you learn along the way are just as valuable as the things that you would have learned if you've been taking sort of consistent steps towards one goal. The kinds of skills that I built when I was in a school, also the skills I built as a Vassar student have been invaluable along the way. The kinds of perspective that I brought to my job as somebody who didn't come in having studied policy as an undergrad and working in Congress or whatever, but that I brought from a school setting, brought a different perspective to the table. So really don't feel like you need to figure it out now. Don't feel like you need to figure it out as a senior. Don't feel like you need to figure it out 3 years later. You have so much time to be exploring and to just find what's right for you. And every step that you take along the way is going to have real value.
Something that I wanted to add in when I asked this question was that I definitely had a different perception of what networking was when I was an undergrad. And I really thought it was about like finding a job. I remember being really frustrated my senior year when my dad was like trying to help me network. And I'm like, but it's not getting me a job, as if like just networking was supposed to get me a job. But like I enjoy networking more, one, because I think it's actually about meeting people who get excited about the same types of things you get excited about. And then finding ways you can collaborate in your jobs and in your next job and beyond. Like, I feel like for me now, networking is, I read this article and it was connected to something we had talked about. And it's more about staying in touch with people you used to work with. It's more about getting connected to some of your friends, coworkers, when they're like, oh, they do this thing I think you think would be cool. So I really just advise you all to take networking like with the outlook of just like, this is an information gathering mission. Like, what can I learn about like what this person does, why they do it, and what I might or might not like about that kind of a role.
I think with that, networking is also going to help you, like the career you want or like the things you might want to do might not have the job title that you think it is. So I've networked a lot this year because I'm moving to Portland in 3 to 6 months. And I didn't realize that the work that I'm doing right now, or that I have been doing at universities, exists in the corporate space as well as university programs or intern programs manager. And I was like, wait, you mean I can do the same thing I'm doing at Nike, at Adidas, at Intel, at all these companies that I thought, oh, well, that's just marketing, or if you're into fashion, and realize that these were all, because I am first gen, a lot of assumptions that I was making about a certain industry. And so that networking has taught me a lot about just how can I do, what do I love the most about my current job, and where else can I do this? And how can I challenge myself, right? Because I'm at a position where my current role is a dream job that I wanted 5 years ago. So what is my dream job of the next 5 years, and how can I get there? I don't know if I mentioned it in this session or the last, but I took the LSAT, got into law school, and almost went 2 years ago. I might take the LSAT again and go to law school at some point in the future, just to keep that door open. But one thing that I learned at Vassar was to be comfortable with ambiguity. I think a lot of you said it, like, you want to do a little bit of everything. That's never going to go away. I've done data science boot camps, I've done coding boot camps, because I'm just like, I want to keep learning. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be free. It could be at your local community college. Right now, because we are remote, it just like has opened this door of like, what class can I sit in? Can I learn marketing? Can I learn Photoshop? Keep that, right? Like, don't lose sight of like keeping those side interests open, because, you know, for me, sometimes I think about like, can my side hustle become my full-time job? Have I just convinced myself that this is the only job for me, or can I have another job? So yeah.
Thanks.
I'm going to jump on the networking train, and again, encourage you to broaden your definition of networking. So every class that you take is networking. Every field study opportunity, every internship, every experience that you have is also, that's like probably the most effective networking, right? Because it's not just a short interaction, but usually a prolonged interaction that then will kind of bear fruit. So it is an ability to be able to ask. We've said it before, Angelica may have said, yeah, talk to your professors. Maybe your professors might know somebody in the field, right? Or again, if you're taking advantage of the things that Vassar will offer you as a student, it will bear fruit. And so again, maybe that is another way to say this overarching piece of advice of, you don't need to do all the things, don't freak out. Again, like some of you might have this like very like perfectionistic, like, oh my gosh, I haven't signed up for 3 summer internships for next summer yet, and you're freaking out. Some of you want to know what grad school you're going to already. So like, give yourself some freedom to be okay as a sophomore, but also just like trust that the things that Vassar will provide for you, they do it for a reason, and they do it because it's effective. Again, you can't see it till afterwards, but like, talk to the CDO, talk to people. What are those experiences? What are those things that they encourage you to do outside of your just regular classroom environment? Those are the things that are going to pay off in spades. Again, transferable skills, the people that you've met, a conversation that leads to a suggestion of, well, what about this? Did you think about that? Have you ever thought about this? And then before you know it, all of a sudden you start to kind of have more clarity around where you're going.
And just to sort of like echo what everybody else is saying, just sort of like be kind to yourself, because, you know, as you can have like the best 5-year plan right now, but I can almost guarantee that like it's not going to go the way you plan for it to go. And, you know, a few years from now, you may find yourself back at this SCC gathering as a mentor. And when your like mentor leader asks you that question about how linear your path was, you know, I'm sure you're going to find yourself describing all the ways in which like you thought it was going to be A to B, but instead it was like, you know, all over the place. It did not go the way that you expected. And I mean, that's okay. You know, you kind of have, you figure it out as you go along. And, you know, somehow we make it work. It's always funny to me at these career gatherings when people talk about their path, it always sounds like, in retrospect, it made so much sense. I guarantee you it did not feel that way, like on the way there. You know, when you're looking back, it seems like you create this story of how you went from one point to the other. Doesn't always feel that way when you're in process. So just like be kind to yourself, you know, and it's all going to work out. You know, it's an exciting time. It's an exciting time and place to be, you know, sophomore at Vassar, and, you know, just enjoy it. And it's just a pleasure meeting all of you and sharing space with you virtually. And yeah, don't ever hesitate to reach out to us or any other Vassar alums, because we always love to hear from people. Yeah, Rebecca?
Yeah, I'd say take advantage of tomorrow's networking reception. Just to remind you, we're going to be on Brazen where you can have one-on-one conversations with us tomorrow afternoon. This was going to be the point in our meeting when we were going to do breakout sessions, but given that there are 5 of you and 5 of us, I think it makes more sense just to stay in this main room. So, especially because you can talk to us one-on-one tomorrow. So I'm going to stop there and just say, this is your time. So what questions have you got?
I can kind of start, I guess, because this is kind of my basic thing that I've been asking a lot. First of all, thank you for this. This talk has been like so good and so helpful. But what is kind of the best advice you've ever received, whether it be like just regarding the job that you have now, or like just regarding life in general, or like the education as a whole? But like, what was the best advice that you've ever received, and how has that like kind of shaped your job, or like how you go about like education and like the whole system in general?
I can go first. So the very best advice is what I just gave. So just that, you know, that it's okay to take your time and figure out what you want to do next, and that there's so much value to find in having a path that's not linear. But I'm going to give a different answer as well, which is a little bit more related to education specifically. My first year after college, I worked at, so I said I worked at a school. I actually worked at 2 schools in the same network, one my first year, one my second year. 2 very different, you know, they were like, it was the same network of schools, but like they felt like totally different, right? Very different culture. And a lot of that was the principal at each school that I worked at. My first year, I worked with a very seasoned principal. You know, both of the schools serve predominantly students of color. This is a woman of color, very connected with the community, very, very smart. And the advice that I got from her, not directly so much as from just like being in her presence, everything that she did, every decision that she made was always trying to serve the students. It was always what is in the best interest of students. And I took that with me when I went to the second school that I worked at. Very different situation. The principal is brand new. He had worked at a different school previously. He wasn't very connected with the community. He was really trying to prove himself. And a lot of the decisions that he made on a day-to-day basis were what was coming down from the higher ups at our network, which was different from my first school, where we had this very established principal. She was doing whatever she thought was best, even if it meant going against what the network said. Sort of the idea of that Kyle was talking about before, of like closing the door and just doing what the right thing was. And so I really felt like what stuck with me was, you know, he would tell me do X, Y, and Z, and I would push back and say, that's not what's best for our kids. We should do, you know, A, B, and C. I think if you're an educator, that's something that will resonate with you as well, that, you know, you always want to be keeping your kids first, while also taking care of yourself. I'll say that shouldn't come at the expense of you taking care of yourself and setting boundaries, but yeah, that would be mine.
So when I volunteered at Sophomore Career Connections in person 3 years ago, one of the other mentors said something that really stuck with me, and I'm probably going to get the ratios wrong, but I'm going to go with it. And it's at first it sounds depressing, but bear with me. So he said that there's no such thing as a perfect job, and at a really great job, you love about 30% of what you do. He says you love about 30% of what you do, and 60% of it you like mostly like or like think is okay, it's pretty good. And 10% is stuff that like you probably would rather not be doing, but you're an adult and you have to do. And when he said that to me, it helped me like realize that like you're not going to find a job where you only do things you like to do all of the time. But the addition I would make to that example is once you know what that 30% is, like once you like know, like these are the things that like I get up in the morning and like love when I have a day that includes X, you can tell people that and you can advocate for getting to do more of that. I think that's something I didn't realize until pretty recently, that like if you're really passionate about something and it only makes up a quarter of your job, there is very rarely harm in telling people, I really like doing this aspect of my work. I would say don't tell them how much you hate the 10% thing. But feel free to tell them, I love doing this. Like, if you ever have more of this, or I'm happy to help. Like, I think the only way you're like, you can sort of build the job you want. Jobs are not static. Jobs are not like, I read this job description and it's going to be the same if I do it, or if Kyle does it. If I do it, it's going to look a little different than if Kyle does it. And we get to sort of shape our jobs. And that's definitely something I didn't have any concept of before entering the workforce.
I'm gonna
That's
jump
great
in a
advice.
similar way here, Rebecca. The advice for me was this twofold piece of advice. We've all heard the expression, do what you love, and then you'll never work a day in your life, right? You've heard that expression before. The person, again, leader of color, who was talking about how do we care for ourselves and maintain sustainability in a job, who framed it as, yeah, at some point in my career, I realized that I'm going to only love what can love me back, right? I'm only going to actually love what can love me back. And your job will never love you back. Your employer will never love you back. That's not how that works. And I think the trap that we can sometimes fall into is this sense of like, we do what we love, and therefore we don't have any boundaries. We just work all the time. We just run ourselves into the ground. So the second piece of it is, if you actually do love the work that you do, then you also need to identify what love means to you, because none of us would identify love as no boundaries, lack of self-care, like I'm stressed and I'm exhausted, I'm hurt. That's called abuse. That's an abusive relationship, not a loving relationship. So again, as we think about work, I like the work that I do. I'm committed to the work that I do. I give myself into the work that I do. That's not a love relationship, because I know that work will never love me back. And if indeed I do love the things that I do, the way that I can keep doing them is, again, thinking about it as like, what would that healthily look like? How do I draw some boundaries? How do I keep myself like in the job and wanting to show up to work every day, and not kind of like being like TGIF and, oh my gosh, it's Monday. Like, what? That's no kind of life to live.
Can I jump in really quickly to add to the flip side, which is that you will probably hate your first job, or at least not really like it, and that is okay. I don't wish that upon anyone, but it happens, and it's okay, and it's normal. Oftentimes, the first time you're working full time is really hard. You might not have figured out what you want to do quite yet, and you might find that there's more. Maybe it's more than 60% of your job is what you don't like, and that's okay, because the things that you learn that you don't like will help you as you figure out what you do like, and as you try to figure out what your next move is. I remember my first year out of Vassar, I would be on FaceTime with my friends, sort of one-off, and I'd sort of be hearing from them, like, people sort of try to put on a good face, like, oh, my job's okay, and like, sort of eventually over time realizing, me feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm really stressed at my job. It's really hard. I'm having a really hard time. Everyone else seems really happy. They're not. They're struggling too. And all of that is normal and okay. So, I don't want to scare anyone, but I just, people don't talk about it in advance. And it's something to know that it's normal and it gets better.
I do want to make sure we have time for more questions. If there are any burning questions, feel free to go. Otherwise, we'll keep going around on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. So I was going to say, I think with that, one thing, my first job was values-based, but it wasn't really like, there was no boundaries. I thought I was doing good work. I thought, this is in service to my community. It's what I have to do. And nothing's ever what you have to do. I had a good mentor tell me, like, you will be able to do social justice in any job. Like, it's you that brings social justice to the work, not the job. And she at the time was a college counselor working at a predominantly white institution or white school in West LA, very affluent, but she was Doctora Oropesa, Dr. O, and she had a Cesar Chavez like poster on her wall. And she was like, every time that a student comes into my guidance office who's a white student who's never heard about Cesar Chavez is going to hear from me who Cesar Chavez is, what the Chicano rights movement is. And it like blew my mind, because I was just like, why am I limiting my role, my potential to just what I think something needs to be? And that's where, again, networking comes in handy. It's like talking to people to figure out, like, you work at Amazon. Amazon gets all this bad rep, but like, what has it helped you do? How are you challenging the institution? Or you know, it's Amazon. You clearly aren't gonna like flip Amazon, but in your team, like, what is it that you're doing? And I think a little bit more with like the job description stuff, right? One thing I wish I would have done a lot earlier in my career in terms of finances was that I didn't negotiate my salary, and I also applied to a job that was lower than what I was worth, if that makes sense. So like, you needed a high school degree and I had a bachelor's degree. And then when I got my master's, I was applying to bachelor's jobs. So I think in terms of, you know, when you're seeing a job description or an internship application that you're thinking like, oh, well, I don't meet all qualifications, apply for it. Don't self-select out of it. Give yourself, like, don't deny yourself before the opportunity denies you. Because you might be thinking like, well, I think I went into education because I was like, this feels intuitive to me. It's what I can do. I'm now at a place where I'm comfortable being like, no, I want a job that challenges me, where I learn something from it, rather than just doing what I know how to do already. So thinking about that as you're exploring those internships where you're like, well, I wanted to teach history, but this is a biology job. Let me try it. I mean, I know a little bit biology. You also don't want to go in it with like zero knowledge of science. But those are like, you know, giving yourself that room to growth is going to help you long term as well.
Any other sophomores with questions? I want to give a little wait time.
This might be a reach, but are there any internships, like summer internships, that you guys can think of right now that either maybe you did in the past that were like really cool for you to do, or like that your friend did or that you know of that I could possibly apply to, because I'm really like on the hunt for those right now?
I loved the internship that I did for the American Federation of Teachers, AFT. I don't know what the internships are like right now because of everything being remote. But they have, you know, they'll do, it's very flexible in the sense that like you can do a summer internship there. I did like 6 months during the semester after my student teaching. But then there were other interns who had been there. They were going to do it for like a year. Some people were doing it part-time while also being in school. Like there's a lot of flexibility there so that it can sort of fit like what your needs are. But that's definitely something. Again, I don't know exactly what it looked like, but that was, for me, that was an incredible experience after my my student teaching semester, to spend 6 months working in you know, working for a teachers union, working on like national education policy issues. And like being in DC and seeing what things were like from that perspective was really, really meaningful.
I'm going to say something a little bit unconventional and say that sometimes I think working in the other direction, instead of looking for an internship, looking for an organization you're passionate about, especially if it's a smaller one, there's rarely harm in reaching out to learn more about what opportunities are out there, especially if you can network and try to get connected to someone. I think often we think like, oh, what's posted on the internet? When in reality, especially if everything's remote right now, and if you can like live at home and or if you're willing to take an unpaid internship or a low paid internship, if you can market yourself and say, you know, I've admired your organization for the last few years. I like what you do with teachers, blah, blah, blah. And like, here's what I can offer. I think that that's sort of an unconventional starting point, but is something I'd recommend at least trying.
I agree. And also, just because I don't think we talked about this in this session, but there's a lot that you can offer as a Vassar student. You know, when I think about what has helped me in my career so far, it's not the things that I've learned in class, in my major. It's it's the critical thinking skills that you build. It's the clear communication skills, writing skills, discussion skills, and time management. At Vassar tends to attract a lot of students who like to overcommit. So that juggling act that you do as a student of your classes, your orgs, whatever other, hanging out with your friends, all of that, it's all really valuable. So, really rely on those soft skills that you've already built so much of as a sophomore. That's what you can offer to an organization. And that's really important.
I'll also say, especially for people who like writing, look at organizations that have blogs. I've managed blogs before. If you can write a blog article, it's a great way to get your foot in the door. I said that when I graduated, I taught preschool part-time and I taught an organization. And I worked at a nonprofit organization part-time. I got my foot in the door at that organization because I agreed to write a mini series for their blog while I was student teaching about student teaching. And then I was sort of able to say like, hey, I'm really interested in your organization. I want you to know I'd love to work there. So I would say that's a good starting point if you enjoy writing.
Yeah, I was back to what Rebecca had said earlier about reaching out to orgs who might not have positions listed. That's how I got my first internship, like between my freshman, sophomore year. I was in a Latin American Latino studies class. We had watched a movie about union organizing in Los Angeles. I saw this organization in the movie called Chifla. I was like, oh, they're still active. I emailed them and said, hey, I see that you have an education department. I have experience working with undocumented students. I want to come and work for you. And I actually, I don't know if the internship grant fund is still available or if it's been rebranded, but for the internship grant fund, you need to have like a sponsoring organization. And Chifla was like, yeah, we'll have you if you can get your own funding. And I was like, cool. And it worked from there, and they gave me a position. And that's how I got involved in the immigrant rights movement in LA, doing what I loved. And, so definitely do that. If you're reading stuff in your class, like, don't be scared to be like, whoa, like, who is this? And like, how can I get connected with them? Because it works.
This may not be what you were asking about, Ilya, as well, but there are a bunch of higher ed interns as well. So you can always talk to, do you know Harrison Taylor, who's helping coordinate this? Harrison was my intern 2 summers ago at the University of Vermont. That's actually why I'm a mentor here right now. That Harrison reached back out to me and was like, you need to come do this mentoring thing. I was like, do I really have to do it? He's like, yeah, you have to do it. But he did an internship through an organization that helps increase access into higher ed jobs for undergrads who hold underrepresented identities. So people with disabilities, LGBTQA people, people of color. And so he was a NASPER undergraduate fellowship program intern with me at the University of Vermont 2 summers ago. But again, a good example of like networking, right? So immediately when I saw Harrison's resume in the pile of resumes, I was like, oh, Vassar, okay, let's see what this is. And I actually had this existential like crisis with my supervisor of saying, is it bad that I really want to hire him just because like I kind of know what, like he's a little bit of a mini me, so to speak. And I'm like, is that bad? And it was helpful to get the stamp of approval of being like, no, if you know the kind of student you're going to get as you hire that student, by all means. And of course it was not a mistake. So I don't regret that decision at all.
I recently networked with another Vassar alum who's a consultant out of the Bay Area. And I didn't know that like these big consulting firms get hired by higher ed institutions. And so if you're someone that likes fast-paced work, learning a little bit about everything, I was like, I didn't know this was a job, and she's doing it. And she connected me with like other members who are doing consulting or who like got into consulting out of higher ed to go into full-time consulting. But I was like, wow, there's so much to, again, like, what are the things that I like about my job? How can I do more of it? And again, yeah, knowing which parts are like, okay, like fiscal stuff isn't fun, but like I need to know how to budget. I don't like
Mhm.
my own budgeting system, but you know, if you want to trust me with a couple $1,000s, I guess I need to be responsible for it.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're just about at time. If you have other questions, we encourage you to chat with us tomorrow or find us online. We're here to help, and we've enjoyed getting to learn a little bit more about you and share a little bit about our experiences. But I think that's all from any of us. Wally, you have any closing announcements?
Just a thank you. That was just the reminder for all the students is that tomorrow's the networking receptions, and please join in and continue the conversations. But thank you everyone for joining in. It was a great opportunity for me to listen in, and I love getting to hear all the advice and your great questions. So thank you, mentors, for giving us your weekends, and thanks students for joining in. So take care, everyone.